Greetings, my friends. Welcome to another week where we dive into some of the new rules for 10th edition of 40k. And one of the things that's come up a few times now is the ability to get lethal hits on units or get +1 on hits on units. I'm going to dive into basically both detachments that Marines can run at the moment, both Gladius and Sons of Sanguinius, and look at just what is better and see if we can draw some conclusions so when you're in a game or you're building your list, you know what you actually want to include. Alright, let's get right into it. Well, thanks for being here, and if we are just meeting, then I am John, the Blood Angels Commander. Can I just say a big shout out to everyone that made me pass 13,000 subscribers this week. Thank you so much for that. We are here every week, breaking down the new rules, talking everything Warhammer 40,000, and lethal hits versus +1 to wound is a question that I've asked myself in a couple of games. I don't really know the impact of it. Like, you know, I ran into an enemy unit with a melee unit that had lethal hits, and I was expecting something, and I didn't really know what to expect. I was expecting it to do more damage. So this is why I've made this video, and hopefully you guys find it useful. And if you do find it useful, consider hitting like on the video. That helps me out so much. The Chaplain is a good candidate to get +1 to wound. There's lots of different Chaplains. You've got Terminator Armors, you've got Firstborn ones, and they can basically all have this ability, Litany of Hate, which basically means when the unit they're leading makes a melee attack, they get +1 to wound. There is other ways to get +1 to wound, and we'll cover them in a minute. And the Lieutenant. The Lieutenant is a good unit to get lethal hits. There is other ways, again, to get lethal hits. I think that new Biologist Apothecary will give lethal hits to certain units, but the Lieutenant gives lethal hits. He also gives fallback and charge and stuff like that. But if you are going to attach some of the units and you want to get these abilities, these are great ways to do them. If you're playing Blood Angels, one of the notable characters that gives lethal hits is Lamartez, and I've actually got a bonus slide on Lamartez at the end, if you want to stick around for that. Another way you could get like lethal hits would be from the Red Rampage stratagem, which is the Sons of Sanguinius stratagem, where you will basically get, if you charge, until the end of the phase, models will have +1 to wound, and they will also gain lethal hits. And in the Gladius detachment, you can get the Lance, which is +1 to wound on the charge, if you play Honor of the Chapter, and if you're in Assault Doctrine, you can actually get 1 AP as well, which is pretty cool. The Sons of Sanguinius detachment has no way of increasing AP except joining a Priest to a unit, and Priests are really limited in the units they can join. They're even more limited now with the announcement today that Assault Marines are basically getting removed from the game. They're going to go into Legends. I'm not super happy about that, but I mean, that's the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. And just so we are all clear, there is ways to get additional attacks and additional strength in melee. If you're in the Sons of Sanguinius detachment, that is your main detachment ability. And the Gladius detachment do have a pretty cool one for assault weapons as well, which is you can declare charge in a turn which you advanced. And also, if you go back to the previous slide, the Assault Doctrine is how we would get the extra AP as well. So you can only use Assault Doctrine once per game, but sometimes you can pay a stratagem to put a unit into Assault Doctrine to basically, and then you could pay Honor of the Chapter. So you could get this from 2 CP, or you could maybe use like your Rites of Battle and a Captain to be able to get into Assault Doctrine more than once per game. So it is possible, okay? Feel free to ask any questions you have in the comments. I'll see if I can do my best to answer them. So I want to start with Death Company Marines. They're a good unit for Blood Angels, but you could probably substitute out Death Company Marines chainswords for Assault Intercessor chainswords. In fact, a Death Company Marine gets the exact same number, that would be 4 attacks per model, with the chainswords, which are strength 4, -1 AP, and 1 damage, and of that weapon skill 3 up. So this first column is very simple. This is the amount of damage that 20 chainsword attacks will do against all these targets. So I purposely included some with low toughness and some with really high toughness. So we're going to look at more than just chainswords, but I wanted to get sort of a feel across like a various number of weapons. So we start with chainswords. So, and then I basically calculated what the lethal hits would increase this number to, and what +1 to wound would increase this number to. So what I can glean straight away is if you have a really bad wound roll, as in like chainswords have a pretty bad wound roll against anything above toughness 4, then you can see that lethal hits actually gets more beneficial. So it's a very small increase when your wound roll is good, but it's pretty big increase when your wound roll is bad. In these cases, you would be wounding on 6s. However, if we look at +1 to wound, it feels much more uniform. Yes, there's some numbers, there's some outliers here because everything has different armor saves. But commonly, +1 to wound seems much more uniform. It's like 15 to 40% against everything, and most of the time it's just like somewhere in the middle of those ranges. Whereas lethal hits gets better when your wound roll gets worse. So that is like top level, and that's there's other slides with other weapons, but that is what I see. That's like the top level that I can see here. Now, what I wanted to compare was like a lot of people, I guess, are looking at the Sons of Sanguinius Detachment. They're prioritizing that, but some people are sticking with Gladiator's Detachment. And I've been doing that because I haven't won a game yet with Sons of Sanguinius Detachment, but I have won my last 2 games with the Gladiator's Detachment. And I was wondering, is Gladiator's Detachment like a lot weaker in melee? So what I thought we could do is we could use a third column here to basically work out what would happen if we had both, as in we had lethal hits and +1 to wound. And in some ways, that is actually just the Red Rampage strat. So any Blood Angels unit, even if it didn't have lethal hits and get +1 to wound, for 1 CP could get Red Rampage. And what does Red Rampage do? Well, Red Rampage is actually huge, right? Like the damage buff it's giving against all these different targets is actually kind of giant. It's as little as 35% against very low toughness, so it looks like playing it against the lower toughness stuff is less valuable because you obviously already have a good wound roll. But anytime you're playing against like toughness 5 and up for a chainsword, so anything with higher toughness than you, then Red Rampage is like doing a significant amount of more damage. And the one thing to mention here is if you are charging with a Sons of Sanguinius Detachment, you have to buff these numbers by 20% because you would get 5 more attacks because you've got that Sons of Sanguinius Detachment that's giving you 5 more attacks. So just imagine these numbers are 20% higher, and that doesn't include the +1 strength. I can't... I'd be here all day if I try to work that out. This took a lot of time for me to work out, to be honest. So hopefully, and hopefully, I mean, someone might point out the numbers are wrong somewhere, but I think I'm really confident that they're accurate. I spent a lot of time on this. And a big shout out to Nick, actually, who helped me a lot figuring this out as well. So Nick has been on the channel before. He's helped me out before. So big props. Nick, if you're watching this, you're a superstar. Thank you so much. Okay, and then I thought, what if we try +1 to wound and the +1 AP? Right, so that would be when you were in Assault Doctrine for the Gladiator's Detachment. How do your numbers look? And if you put these two together, then when I first started working out, I was like, oh god, Gladiators actually do more damage against like Marines and Terminators and Orc Boys. And I was like sitting there depressed for a minute until I remembered, okay, sorry, my bad. Sons of Sanguinius do get 1 more attack per model, and I guess when you've got 4 base, 1 more attack per model is a 20% increase. So this 6 would get increased to 7.2, which in some ways is actually a little bit depressing that Gladiator's Marines in the Assault Doctrine actually do more damage than Sons of Sanguinius Marines, just because I guess they have additional point of AP. And this is why I was saying I'm not sure I love this +1 strength here. +1 strength obviously can be impactful in some situations, like in this situation against this Marines, it would actually mean that yes, this damage would be slightly better than the Gladiator's Detachment. But the second you start fighting things that are more than 1 point of strength away, and I guess when you're fighting with a chainsword, most things are going to be more than 1 point of strength away from the chainsword, then the 1 point of strength very quickly kind of becomes redundant. I think I've said that. I don't know why I keep getting sidetracked on this. Sorry, you've probably heard it before. I think Sons of Sanguinius Detachment would have been better if it had been +1 AP, +1 attack, as opposed to the +1 strength. But regardless, let's forget about that. So I guess my point being, though, yes, I think Gladiator's melee is actually not bad at all. Yes, you might need to be in Assault Doctrine to get the most out of it, but for me, I feel like Assault Doctrine in the Gladiator's Detachment is the doctrine you shout or call, or however you activate your doctrine. I guess you just call your doctrine at the start. When you call your doctrine, It reminds me a lot of like when you used to go into Assault Doctrine in 9th edition. You know, turn 1, turn 2 in 9th edition, we didn't make too many charges. Turn 3, we would go Assault Doctrine, make a load of charges, we had more killing power. Now I think the difference with playing Blood Angels is you can almost do that Doctrine call turn 2. Because you can get a lot of stuff forward in turn 1, then use your advance and charge in turn 2 to make a lot of charges turn 2, which I like a lot because I hated having to wait 3 turns to actually really get involved in the game. So I think you're probably going to want to be playing this stratagem is called Honor the Chapter. You're probably going to want to be playing that in turn 2 when you're in Assault Doctrine anyway. So the damage output from infantry in the Gladiator Detachment, it is worse than the Sons of Sanguinius Detachment, but it isn't a whole lot worse. You know, like this would be 7.2 against 7.4, and then yes, you're factoring a slightly better wound roll now because of your +1 strength. And again, you know, this would be 4.2 against probably like, this would be like 3.9, but then you've got +1 on your wound. So again, Sons of Sanguinius is going to be ahead here. Assuming you are making a charge, which you will be most of the time because we're a melee chapter. But the Gladiatus isn't doing bad. Like, it really isn't bad to play melee units in Gladiatus. They aren't bad, and I guess if you're giving them the honor of the chapter, they're kind of keeping up. They're probably worst case 5 or 10% behind. Maybe a little bit more behind it when you get to like double toughness stuff, like strength 12. Right. There's a lot to take in there. Like I said, the main takeaway is lethal hits gets better against worse wound rolls. +1 to wound is kind of uniform. And then I did the whole slide again. This is a different slide, even though it barely looked like it changed. This is a whole slide again, but now with power fists. So 15 power fists this time. It's worth noting, because you only get 3 attacks with a power fist, that charging with the Sons of Sanguinius Detachment will now buff damage by 33%, because that +1 attack for each 5 guys is now worth more because you have less base attacks, right? Power fists only get 3 attacks, chainswords get 4 attacks, right? So your Sons of Sanguinius gets a little bit better here in terms of damage output. Again, I've not included the +1 strength for that, but let's look at lethal hits again. So when you're using power fists, which lots of people are thinking Lamartis plus power fists is the way to run Death Company or Thunderhammers, but when you're using those power fists, you can actually see, again, when you come up to high toughness, the lethal hits helps, but against anything around or anything less toughness, lethal hits is a very, very small increase in damage. Like under 10%, under 5% if you wound on 2s. It's tiny. If you wound on 3s, it's under 10%. +1 to wound, again, is much more uniform. So generally, I would guess, like, I've been attaching a chaplain, like a regular unnamed chaplain, to my Death Company rather than Lamartes. Lamartes has other bonuses, like he can give them -1 damage, but I guess like if you're just looking to do damage output, and I mean, I guess you could also argue that like a Firstborn Chaplain over Astaroth might be better as well for Blood Angels. +1 to wound, I guess, just gives you solid, 25 to 50% damage output. It's just shifting those dice, basically, 1 all the time, and that's making a big difference. Again, it's making a bigger difference, slightly bigger difference against the really high toughness stuff. But overall, it's just uniform. It's just good. +1 to wound is good. We had it last edition. We knew it was good. It's interesting to see that it's much, much better than lethal hits. Because I think in the game I played Lamartes, I assumed that lethal hits was going to help me out a lot. It didn't really. So I think if you're running Lamartes, you get into this weird situation where you already have lethal hits from attaching Lamartes. So you think to yourself, well, maybe I don't need to play Red Rampage because I already have lethal hits. I think the reality of the situation is you actually still need to play Red Rampage because lethal hits doesn't help you out enough. It doesn't buff your damage enough. You know, like it's... Like in this case, it doesn't even do 1 whole more point of damage. So, because these are average numbers, you probably still just did like, 2 damage, or you still killed 1 model here, So yeah, if we take both, again, if we play Red Rampage on these Death Company Marines, then, you can see here, like, Red Rampage is just very good. Statistically, 40 to 100 and some percent damage. It's pretty reliable, and again, for these numbers, if you were charging, you need to increase them by 33%. +1 to wound and +1 AP, again from the hero of the chapter. So that would basically be like, does this manage to keep up with the Power Fists? And I guess the answer this time round is no, because the second you add on your 33% damage to 7.6, you're quite a bit ahead here. So I think it's interesting to see that, like, Gladiatus is actually going to be better with, like, chainswords, and Sons of Sanguinius is going to be better with low number of attacks. So, like, Centurions are going to benefit from Sons of Sanguinius more because they only have 3 attacks per model, because that 4th attack is a 33% damage increase. Power Fists are going to benefit more from the Sons of Sanguinius detachment. But the Gladiatus detachment still is not bad, right? Like, the extra AP, the +1 to wound, it's pretty decent. Like, it's because I think the flexibility that Gladiatus gives you with, like, the fallbacking and shooting, the advance and charging, the Devastator Doctrine to use maybe on, like, what are they called? Desolation Marines. The Gladiatus detachment gives you so many different options, and the Sons of Sanguinius detachment is so, like, the numbers are so small ahead, right? Like, a couple of points of damage here. Like, in this case, like, 33% more damage, so that goes to 6.5. So you do, like, 2 more damage against the Beast and Nurgle. Against a Hecaton Land Fortress, again, you do what, like, 33% more damage, and this is literally 1 more damage. So you do 1 more damage. So it's, like, really hard, for me anyway, to see this, like, because Sons of Sanguinius detachment is only benefiting your melee. We know right now armor's really, really good. We know that there's, like everyone can be running tank shock and stuff like that on knights. So we know there's loads of mortal wounds coming out. We know that there's advantages having those big toughness 10, toughness 11 tanks. It's also very much more difficult now to do high level plays with melee. Like, it's just more difficult to get all you guys in combat. You can't consolidate if you ever kill enemies in the open. You can't consolidate into ruins unless there's objectives there. It's much more difficult to get models around the board and play in melee. And Gladiatus really does keep up. Like, I really think that, like, I really expected when I was doing this for the Sons of Sanguinius to be a good amount ahead, not just, like, 2 points of damage. Like, you're giving up everything you're giving up all 3 doctrines for a couple of points of damage. And in my recent games, my infantry have just been blown off the board before they even, like, I get a charge with 1 unit of infantry and all the other ones are just blown off the board instantly. Toughness 4 infantry do not have durability at all nowadays. Like, it's ridiculous how little durability they have, actually. So, lethal hits, +1 to wound. We've been sidetracked a little bit. We always do get sidetracked in my videos. I talk about everything and try and give you my opinion on the game and what you can do to win, but I guess my advice based on this is, if you're going to run melee, you want to attach captains, or you at least want to have 1 captain so you can get that Red Rampage for free. We looked at Sangre Guard a few weeks back and they get such a big bonus from Red Rampage. So I think a captain with a Sangre Guard is going to be just much better than Dante, in my opinion, because you're going to get that free Red Rampage, and I think that's going to be a lot more valuable than the +1 to hit that Dante's going to give you. I guess the disadvantage there is that Dante gives you the +1 to charge, which can be useful. You don't make your charges, you don't do any damage. But yeah, lethal hits is really not as good as I thought it was. I actually didn't know any of the numbers, so this is why I was doing this. +1 to wound is very consistent. I've got some more slides. Let's talk about it. So lethal hits. Based on these numbers, if you're winning on 3s, it's an 8% damage buff. It's 4s, it's 16%. On 5s, it's a 33%. If you only wound on 6s, it's an 83% damage buff, because I guess you would have to roll to hit, and every 6 there counts as counts as like another 6, essentially, like an auto wound. So it would make sense it's 83%. +1 to wound, though, is much more uniform. The Power Fist, for example, is basically 33% with a solid range of 20 to 50%. And anytime you can get 20 to 50% more damage for no CP, i.e. you've got a captain equipped, or you're taking a cheap chaplain and equipping it to a unit, then I think that's a win. So I think if you're looking for leaders, you're not sure who your leaders are going to be, and you're looking for some cheap leaders, like Blade Guard with a Primaris Chaplain would be good. Terminators with a Terminator Chaplain would be good. And also, I was going to say Assault Marines with a Chaplain were good, but Assault Marines, they're not going to be, you can't play them competitively anymore, which sucks. So I guess you could do Vanguard Veterans with a Chaplain. Might be okay. Yeah, suck times. I feel like with the change to Assault Marines, there's almost no jump pack units Blood Angels players can use effectively, really effectively. But maybe that's a conversation for another day. So unless you're only going to be wounding on 6s before you activate Lance, then +1 to wound is always stronger. So basically what I mean by that is, if you had a unit that could choose between lethal hits and +1 to wound, then unless you're wounding on 6s, so unless like you're toughness 4 fighting something that is toughness 8 or higher, strength 4, something double your strength, then +1 to wound is always better. The only situation +1 to wound is not better in is if you're fighting something double your toughness or higher. Then lethal hits is better, because lethal hits is an 83% damage buff when you wound on 6s. All the other time, +1 to wound is better. When I first thought about making this video, Assault Marines can choose between lethal hits and +1 to wound. You can choose that if you have the chainsword ones, but I guess that only counts for Legends now, which is not really what my channel's about. I don't really do Legends. I'm not really interested in playing Legends. I'm interested in competitive play. So, stacking these abilities against enemies which you have terrible rolls against, i.e. chainswords into like the toughness 9+, can actually buff their damage to a somewhat respectable level. And we did see that if we go back a couple of slides. Like a Hecaton Land Fortress, you only do 0.74 damage against it with a 5-man squad of chainswords. It buffs it by 129%, which sounds good on paper. 129% buff is good. But then when you've got a 145-point Gladiator Lancer, which would be 10 points cheaper than those 5 Death Company with chainswords, that can do basically 18 damage from 72 inches, which is 10 times the damage that Death Company can do in melee, assuming you can get all 5 guys across the board without being overwatched, and also all into engagement range with everyone in base-to-base contact, which is a lot of hoops to jump through for 1.7 damage, and you've paid to get your Red Rampage. I'm so off topic. Like, I'm bitter about the state of melee in the game currently. I don't know if I'm bitter, because I have been winning games with armor, but I'm finding it very difficult to say anything positive about melee units, or about infantry units at the moment. Armor is king at the moment. And I think it will be for a little while. So that's my conclusion. +1 to wound is generally mostly better. Lethal hits damage output is only good, really, when you wound on 5s and 6s. And even then, it's not that big an increase. Like, if you were fighting Beast and Nurgle, if you go 5 guys with Power Fist, you go from 2.2 damage to 2.9 damage. Well, it's so, like, Beast and Nurgle just, if you don't do 7 wounds to them and kill them, they just regenerate back to full health. So this extra damage here from like lethal hits is actually irrelevant. So here's my bonus Lamartus slide. Lamartus plus 10 Death Company with Power Fists, Sons of Sanguinius versus Gladiatus. So if we've got Sons of Sanguinius plus Red Rampage, and we take Gladiatus plus Assault Doctrine and Honor the Chapter. So it would be 40 Power Fists, at Strength 9 -2, 2 damage into Hecaton, will do 7.41 damage. 30 power fists with one less strength but one more AP, so that's 10 less attacks, will actually do more damage into the Hecaton. That's a little bit depressing. In that situation, Sons of Sanguinius is actually objectively worse. Because like I said, the strength 9 becomes irrelevant against the strength 8, but minus 3 AP is always going to be more relevant, I guess, into minus 2. There is other situations, I guess, where models have an invulnerable save, and this is a good example, where you're 40 power fists into the Beast of Nurgle will do 14.81 damage. You'll kill two Beasts of Nurgle in the Sons of Sanguinius detachment, but you might only kill one in the Gladiatus detachment, because extra AP against Beasts of Nurgle doesn't help you at all because they have a 5-up invuln, so that doesn't really change. And also strength 9 from the +1 strength will actually help your wound roll, where I guess strength 8 will have a crappy wound roll into Beasts of Nurgle because they are toughness 9. So the depressing thing here for me is that Gladiatus is actually better into some situations. Yes, Sons of Sanguinius is better into some as well, but I think you're giving up a lot to be a Sons of Sanguinius detachment. You should be better against everything. There should be no situation where 10 more attacks ends up with you doing less damage. But that's the reality of the situation right now. So if you are on the fence about Sons of Sanguinius, I can understand why you want to try Gladiatus. It's good. It wins games for me. I've been enjoying it. Watch the last 2 live battles on the channel. They're both Gladiatus detachments. They're both armor heavy lists, and we've beaten 2 pretty difficult lists to deal with. And I feel really good about both the games. One of the games I scored like 90 points. I can kind of forget what I scored in the other one, but I think I scored well in both of them. But yeah, in this case, because Lamartez brings the lethal hits to your guys in the Gladiatus detachment, they do really well. And there will be those weird breakpoints, right? Like when you're fighting something at the same toughness as you, I guess +1 to strength will help. But in a way, it's a bit the same as like Death Guard. Death Guard's aura in 10th edition is like -1 toughness. Well, I said to Colin, -1 toughness on an aura is a really weird aura, because if you're fighting against me who has a repulsor down who's toughness 12, it doesn't really matter if you make my repulsor toughness 11, it's still toughness 11. Whereas like against like a 4 toughness infantry, then -1 toughness is a big deal because it's proportional to the number, right? -1 off 12, small percent. -1 off 4, big percent. So it's interesting. I hope this video, I mean, the idea behind this video is to clear up lethal hits and +1 to wound, and make it clear to people when to use the stratagems. And I think if you have lethal hits on a character, you probably always still want to use Red Rampage. If you have +1 to wound, then I probably wouldn't play for the lethal hits, unless, like it said here, unless you're only going to be wounding on 6s before you activate Lance, then it might be okay to play Red Rampage. Otherwise, I'd probably avoid it. I feel like the new rules are confusing. It's difficult to remember some of these things. The universal keywords I thought was going to simplify things. I think it actually makes it really difficult. I'm struggling with it. Even though I break this down every week, I'm struggling with it. So if you're struggling with it, that's fine. Don't get too upset. Remember to like this video if you got some value out of it, guys. I really do appreciate you sticking around and watching to the end. Remember, I am here on YouTube every week. You can subscribe, that means the world to me, or you can support me either by clicking the big join button under this YouTube video, or clicking over on Patreon, and for less than the price of a cup of coffee, you can help me get these videos out every week. I do really appreciate all the members. And you get a free super chat for my live streams. Members get one every month. You're more than welcome to use it. If you didn't see the video that we had on the podcast this week, that was also out yesterday. If you just search YouTube for 3 Grots in a Vox, You'll find our podcast. It goes out every second Thursday. And we just recently broke over 1,000 subscribers over on the podcast as well. So please check it out if you just want some more background noise while you're hobbying or anything like that. I have been John. It's been a pleasure to have you guys watch the video this week. I hope this one helps. Leave me a comment below if there's anything you'd like to ask, or if you've got suggestions for a future video, and feel free to join our Facebook group or Discord. There is links in the video description. I will catch you in the next one. By the blood are we made strong, my brothers. Peace.